Hi there, my name is Elizabeth and I blog at awellpurposewoman.com. Tonight we're going to be making these cute fabric pumpkins. We're going to be sewing them. There is a pattern of at least 3 different sizes, but you can really create this pattern into any size if you just follow the outline of this pumpkin section. You can really make it any size you want. Tonight we're going to be using the different pattern sizes. There is a pattern for a small pumpkin, a medium pumpkin, and for a large pumpkin. So you will make these 3 different pumpkin sizes tonight. And again, you can change the pattern size by just tracing around the original and making it a little inch or 2 smaller or bigger. So let's get started on making these fabric pumpkins. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them down below and I'll get back to you. So thanks so much for joining us and let's get started. Now, as I mentioned, there's 3 different sizes I made: small, medium, and large. This is the large one here. As you can see, it's a pretty big pumpkin. It ends up being about 12 inches high and 12 inches wide. Now the medium pumpkin ends up being closer to about 9 to 9.5 inches. And then the small pumpkin ends up being closer to 7.5 inches. Now you can vary the size of the pumpkin just by adding an inch or so around the pattern or inside the pattern to make it smaller. And that will give you a different size pumpkin. So you can really create a variety of sizes if you wish. Otherwise, I just have the 3 different sizes: small, medium, and large, and those are good to work with as well. So after we cut out our pattern, and today I am going to be using the medium size pattern. Once that's cut out, and I like to cut it out actually onto a cardstock or cardboard so the pattern's a little more durable for using with a number of pumpkins. Then we're just going to take our fabric, and today I'm actually using this old IKEA curtain. It's just a very nice, thick fabric that was probably going to be destined for Goodwill or the garbage just because there's stains on the curtain. I won't want to use it as a curtain any longer. But definitely some wonderful fabric that will be worth saving and transforming into today's project, which are these fabric pumpkins. So I'm going to start by cutting out my pattern, and you're going to want to cut out 6 different sections of the pumpkin. So using the same pattern, just cut it out 6 times, and I'm just going to fold my fabric here so that I can cut 2 at a time. So just go ahead and print off your pattern, cut it out, and then take your fabric and cut out the 6 sections of your pumpkin. If you have any questions as I'm going through this, just feel free to put them in the comments box, and then I will check those as I go and try to respond to them while we're kind of working on the project. But as you can see, I'm just taking 2 pins on the top and bottom of the pumpkin and just pinning it in place and then cutting around that pattern. And I am doubling up the fabric, so I'm doing 2 at a time. So if anyone needs me to slow down or go through anything again, just feel free to stop me. But if everyone's good, then we'll just keep on cutting and hopefully then soon move on to the sewing part. And I'm just gonna, in the replay of this, I'll probably go through some of this a little bit quicker, just so you can get an idea of how to make these pumpkins without having to watch all the details of our class today. And as I'm cutting this, I will just mention that the fabric you choose for these is important. This pattern works really well for cotton or flannel or things that is a sturdy fabric, not too stretchy. You could use it for that, but it's really designed for more like a 100% cotton, a duck cloth even would work pretty good, or a sturdier fabric, because that just works a little bit better with this pattern. And it actually works pretty well with a thicker fabric. Some of the other fabric pumpkins that we make actually work a little bit better with stretchy material, like the velvet ones or the sock pumpkins or sweater pumpkins. Those work a little bit better if you have a stretchy fabric. These, on the other hand, are better for those more sturdy fabrics like duck cloth or drop cloth. So I would choose that type of fabric. And if you have any more questions about that, again, feel free to leave those down below. Now we're going to move on to sewing our pumpkin. So I'm going to start by pinning 2 of the pumpkin sections together just on one side. And we're going to just sew a seam on the one side of the pumpkin. So I'm going to bring my sewing machine over here. Hopefully you guys can get a good view of it. And let me just take a minute and set it up here. So you're going to just have your regular sewing foot on, and you're going to take the 2 different sections of the pumpkin, and like I mentioned, just sew a seam down the one side of the pumpkin. So when I first start with the seam, I always like to do a quick reverse stitch just to secure the thread in place, and then I don't have to tie up the end. So it's kind of a lazy little hack, but then just go ahead and sew along the outside edge of 2 of the pumpkin sections. And when you get to the end of that seam, go ahead and reverse stitch it a little bit to secure the thread in place, and then just cut off the thread and remove the sections from your sewing machine. And pretty much we're going to just continue doing this until we attach all 6 sections. So when you open up this first seam, your pumpkin sections will kind of make like a pita pocket. I'm going to try to move it out of the way so you can see a little better. You can see it's kind of like a pita pocket. There's 2 different sections that are attached on one side. Now we're going to take a 3rd section and we're going to pin that in place on this pita pocket. So on one of the sides, on the inside of the pita pocket, you're going to pin the 3rd section on the one side. So the piece that you're pinning is on the inside of the pita pocket on half of it. And then you're just going to take that over to your sewing machine, and we're going to sew a seam again along the one side. And you'll see that the pumpkin eventually will start taking shape, and you'll just continue to grow that pita pocket, so it's going to be like an accordion style pita pocket. And then once we have all 6 attached on the one side, then we'll attach the 2 sides of our pumpkin together. So let me just sew this 3rd section in, and then I will show you how to attach the 4th and 5th and 6th sections, and then finally how to close up the pumpkin. So you can see here our accordion pumpkin expanding. So now we have the 3 sections attached together. Now we're going to take our 4th section and laying it on the inside of our pumpkin, we're going to pin the top of our pumpkin sections together so that the 4th section is inside, kind of over, on top of the 3rd section, and we're just going to sew again the one side in place. And I know that this can get a little confusing, so the best way to explain it I have found is to think of your pumpkin kind of like a pita pocket, like I mentioned. And every time you add a layer, you're kind of adding the next layer, so it's laying on top of the previous layer, but you're just sewing the one seam where they kind of overlap. And eventually you'll have to decide if you want your seams to be facing in, like so that the seams are hidden, or if you want the seams out. Like the ones I have made, I actually like to show the seams because it kind of looks like sections on the pumpkin, or just defines them even more. So I'm planning to leave all my seams facing out, but you can definitely make your pumpkin with your seams facing in. So here I have the 4th section attached. You can really see the shape of the pumpkin coming together. So we're going to attach the 5th section next. I just pin that again on the inside of the pumpkin so that the 4th and 5th layers are kind of overlapping. Just pin it in place, and then I'm just going to take it over to the sewing machine and sew it. And I can slow down again, like I mentioned. If I'm going too fast, just feel free to stop me, and I will definitely take a break and help with any questions that you might have. And again, if you don't want to be on with your microphone, you can just put those in the chat box below. I'm just going to reverse stitch quick and then quickly sew this 5th seam, and then I'll show you how I will attach the entire pumpkin together once we get that 6th section attached. Now you can see my 5 sections, and I just have one more section to make this pumpkin complete. So I'm going to take that final section and pin it on the inside of the pita pocket pumpkin just like I did before, just on the one side, pinning it. And I'm going to attach the 6th piece to the 5th piece on the inside of that pumpkin. And then I will show you the final stitch, which will be attaching the 1st pumpkin section to the 6th. So let me go over to my sewing machine here, do a quick little reverse stitch, and then sew a running stitch along the 5th and 6th sections of the pumpkin. And reverse stitch at the end, just cut it off. And then now you can see all 6 sections are attached, and you can definitely see the shape of my pumpkin here. And the last step is to attach the 1st and 6th sections together. So I'm just going to pin those 2 pieces together. And the most important thing, as I kind of mentioned before, just make sure that you continue to do your seams the same way all the way around. Like this was probably the most confusing thing when I started making these, but you just want to make sure that you're always doing the seam the same. So I'm planning to use the seams facing outward, and if you plan to do it the opposite way so that the seams are hidden, you still want all the seams to be the same. So just as you're going through this, make sure that you're doing your seams all the same, and once that 1st and 6th section are sewn together, then you really have the base of your pumpkin. You can see how the pumpkin is going to take shape. So once I am finished sewing this stitch, which is again closing up the pumpkin on the side by sewing the 1st and the 6th section together, then we will work on the bottom and the top of the pumpkin. So we're going to start by closing up the bottom of our pumpkin, and I'm just going to fold all the sides of the pumpkin together and then sew a stitch straight across the bottom of my pumpkin. And you could bunch up all the sections into a little cinch and then sew across that as well. I'm going to take some embroidery thread at the end and kind of cinch the bottom together. Some people also like to add a little patch on the bottom so you don't even see those seams at all. That's up to you as well. But I just sewed that straight stitch across so you can see the bottom of my pumpkin is closed. And if I open it up here, you can kind of see that it does make like a line on the bottom. But isn't it pretty at this point? You can see your pumpkin that you're making, and it looks like a pumpkin almost, and you can just imagine how it's going to take shape now. So that's always pretty exciting. So our next step is going to be to fill our pumpkin, and we're going to use rice and polyfill to do that. And you can use pebbles or sand as well. So I just take about a half to a cup of rice and just fill it in the bottom of the pumpkin. And I just grabbed this little Tupperware cup. It had a smaller mouth on it, so you could use a cylinder or something to pour that rice into your pumpkin. And once you have the rice in, then we're just going to take polyfill for the rest of the pumpkin and just stuff that in to the bottom of the pumpkin. And I like to use a lot of polyfill for these pumpkins. Funny story, I actually got this polyfill recently on a trip to Fargo. It's about a 5-hour drive, and so I was making fabric pumpkins all along the way. By the time we got there, I was out of polyfill, so I was just thinking, well, on the way home, I'm going to want to have more polyfill. So we stopped at a garage sale, and there just happened to be 4 big bags of batting or pillow batting when we got there, and they were 50 cents a piece. So I got enough fabric pumpkins or batting for all the rest of the fabric pumpkins on the way home, and also for this pumpkin tonight. So that's what I'm using. It's always a mystery, and sometimes just you hit the jackpot at a garage sale, and I happened to get exactly what I needed, so I was pretty happy. But anyways, so your pumpkin should look like this, nice and plump, and again, make it really full. You can even press down on the pumpkin a little bit to start shaping it and make sure that you have it. But as you can see with these pumpkins, I did not leave much room in the pumpkin at all, so I want to just keep putting the polyfill in there until it's really full. Now I think this is looking pretty good. I'm pretty satisfied with how plump this pumpkin is. So the next step is to close up the top of our pumpkin, and we're going to use this white embroidery thread or any thread that matches your pumpkin. Since my pumpkin's white, I'll use the white embroidery thread. Just cut off a 12 to 18 inch piece, tie a knot on one of the ends. I like to tie three or four times to give myself a nice big knot, and then just thread your needle with the embroidery thread, and then we're going to just cinch up the top of our pumpkin. So just start on the inside of the top of the pumpkin and just pull the thread out, and then just close up the top by creating a running stitch around the opening of the pumpkin, and then just go in and out of the pumpkin every half inch or so, just trying to close up the pumpkin. So I'll just quickly show you. Just go all the way around through the top of each section of the pumpkin, and then once we get all the way around, we're just going to pull the thread tight, cinch the pumpkin up, and then I'll take my needle and thread and go through the center of the pumpkin a few more times. So let me just finish sewing around the opening, and then I'm just pulling it tight to close that opening, and then I'm going to take the needle and thread and go through the center a few more times just to give it a nice tight close. Yeah, to answer the question in the chat, I just sewed around the opening and then pulled the thread tight, closing it up. And it's okay if some of the thread is showing. We're going to cover up the top of the pumpkin with the stem and leaves and pumpkin curls. So I'm not too concerned about it being perfect, but this will give your pumpkin a nice look, and it will close up the top of the pumpkin nicely. And now that you've pulled that embroidery thread tight and you've sewn in and out the center several times, just go ahead and tie a knot and cut off any extra embroidery thread that you have. And again, I like to knot it 3 or 4 times to make it nice and tight. And then once I am done with that, then I just cut off any extra embroidery thread that I have. And that's it. Now our pumpkin is closed on the top and the bottom. I mentioned on the bottom that I was going to cinch up that seam a little bit. So I'm going to just take my needle and thread again and just cinch those bottom sections together, and I'll show you quickly how to do that. So again, just take your needle and thread on the bottom of the pumpkin and just pull the 2 sections, because your seam, you kind of have a line going across the bottom of the pumpkin. So I just took the center of both of the sections of the bottom of the pumpkin, and then I'm just embroidering, using the embroidery thread to go in and out between pulling those 2 sections together so that it's kind of like one big section on the bottom. This isn't 100% necessary. Like I said, some people put a little patch on the bottom, or you really don't have to worry about what the bottom of your pumpkin looks like because it'll be sitting on a surface. But this is just a little extra step to make the pumpkin look good on the bottom as well as the top. Then just tie off your thread again in 3 or 4 knots, and then cut off any extra embroidery thread. And now we have our pumpkin. So the last step is to embellish our pumpkin. So I'm going to take some twine and further emphasize the different sections of my pumpkin. Now, in the past, I've used an upholstery needle and twine to get through the pumpkin, but I would probably recommend doing that actually before you close up your pumpkin tightly, because it's really hard to get an upholstery needle with twine through any type of fabric without causing a huge puncture. As you can see, I just took the twine and wrapped it around the center of one of the sections, and then I'm going to crisscross the twine on the underside of the pumpkin underneath that first twine that I wrapped around, just to give it so that it stays in place better. And then I'll take the twine again and go through the final sections of the pumpkin. So this will just again further emphasize the pumpkin sections. You're just pulling the twine, wrapping it in between the sections so that your seams and twine are both kind of creating different sections of your pumpkin. And then just go ahead and tie a knot on the bottom of the pumpkin to hold that twine in place. And this actually works just as well as using the upholstery needle, but my guess is most people don't have an upholstery needle around the house anyways. So this is probably going to work better for most of you. If you do have an upholstery needle, you could try going through it before, again, everything is tightly closed up. But there we go. So we have the 6 different sections with our seams and with our twine. And now our last step is to embellish our pumpkin. So I'm actually going to use this old bag to cut out some pumpkin leaves today. I don't know about you, but I have found a great way to find nice fabric for using in home decor projects is actually to repurpose old items that were used long ago for something else. Like I got this bag free at a garage sale again this weekend, and so I'm going to be cutting out my leaves with this pattern I have from this old bag, and I'm just really loving this old leathery look to it, and I think it'll be perfect for my leaves. So but really it's pretty simple. Just cut out a leaf with a couple different sections, and you just want to match the size of the leaf with the size of the pumpkin that you're creating. And you can play around with the colors. I always like to use this old leather or pleather for my leaves. You can use felt, you can use any type of fabric you want. You can even match the fabric that you use for your pumpkin to the fabric for the leaf and stem. But for tonight, I'm going to use this pleather type material, cut out my leaves, and then I just hot glue that on to the center of the top of the pumpkin. And again, this is a great way to hide any imperfections from the twine wrapping or from closing up the pumpkin. We're really going to hide anything that is not, we don't want to be visible, I guess. And now that I have my leaves, I just have to choose a stem that I like. And this sometimes can take a little bit of work to find just the right stem. And once you do that, then just hot glue that in place along with your leaves. And now our final step is to add some pumpkin curls. So I'm just going to twist that around a pencil, cut those off, and then we're going to attach those to the top of the pumpkin as well with the hot glue gun. I'm just going to quickly rewrap this curl here. It kind of lost its shape when I took it off the pencil. And so once that is in place, or I guess how I want it, then I'll hot glue it in place. And you can use lots of things for the pumpkin curls as well. You can use wire that's covered in burlap, wire that's covered in paper. You can use old spiral notebook. You can use rusty springs from an old baby crib. There's so many options, again, for cute embellishments for the top of these pumpkins. I've also seen people use floral sprigs for fall, just adding kind of a more dramatic top to the pumpkin. You could use that as well. I hope you enjoyed making these pumpkins. This is how you sew these gorgeous fabric pumpkins for fall. So now that I've shown you how to make them, I'm going to turn off the crafting table camera here, and I'm just going to open it up for if you want any help with deciding on your fabric, or if you have any questions about it, I will open it up for that. Again, if you're watching the recorded version, feel free to email me any questions at elizabeth@awellpurposewoman.com. But here's our pumpkin for one last shot of it, and I'll show you the set of pumpkins. If you do decide to keep your seams showing like mine, one other trick to getting the frayed look on your seams is just to pull at the thread on the seam a little bit, and it might happen kind of naturally if you're leaving the seams facing out, but if it doesn't, you can just take the thread and just pull it a little bit so that the seams fray a little, and that kind of gives it a nice rustic look to it, or kind of more natural type boho look or something. So I liked doing that just to give it a little bit more character and make it a little more unique. And if it isn't coming out, you can just use the scissors and kind of cut off a little bit of the thread. But that's the last thing I just wanted to show you. So if you have any questions, again, just let me know. But now you can see we made this gorgeous pumpkin, and you have this beautiful pumpkin set for fall. So let's just open it up for any questions. And for those of you who are not joining tonight, thank you so much for purchasing the course and partaking in our Create Fall in Your Home this year, even though you weren't able to join us live. We really, really appreciate you participating as well. And once you're completed with your pumpkins, I love seeing them. So please email me pictures of those, and I would love to share those with all the crafters in our email list. So if you do finish your set of fabric pumpkins, but you weren't able to join us tonight, then please send those to me. And again, if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer those as well. So thank you so much. Take care and happy crafting.